Good morning, philosophers. Hope you're well today. You'll have to excuse the lawnmowers that started working right as I sat down in my studio to do this. I can't do anything about the noise, and I got to get on with my day. So let's get into it. Chapter 2. Worry. Sharks in the swimming pool. My life has been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened. A quote by Michael Equim de Montaigne. I only speak English, if that's not clear to you people by now. Chris was an ambitious computer consultant haunted by a peculiar anxiety. His fear that nuts and bolts or other components of airplanes would fall on his head, possibly killing him. If he heard the sound of an aircraft while walking outside, he would consider taking shelter. He felt anxious even if the plane were not directly overhead. For he speculated that falling objects might travel some lateral distance if they were thrown to the side by the airplane turning or by a powerful wind. This is one of a long list of some of my clients' far-fetched fears. Here are a few other examples. A 38-year-old elevator inspector was obsessed with the thought that he might suddenly decide to become a woman and have a sex change operation. Though he never had felt such a desire, and in his sexual preferences and behavior, he was an entirely typical heterosexual male. Wow. A lawyer was afraid that she might inadvertently impregnate herself by touching microscopic deposits of semen on objects, such as a doorknob, and then accidentally touching herself while in the bathroom. A middle-aged married accountant who had sent an angry but non-threatening memo to a former boss began to worry that the boss might sue her, causing her to lose her house and all her savings and become a bag lady. A timid lady who would never hurt a fly always avoided listening to news broadcasts and became panicky if she overheard part of such a broadcast, because she was afraid that she might hear of some atrocity, such as a mass killing, and be uncontrollably impelled to copy it. This is not good for my faith in humanity. This is not good at all. A young music teacher was afraid to go into a public swimming pool in a Midwestern city because there might be sharks there, which might eat him, or at the very least bite off one of his feet. An intelligent person, he readily admitted that sharks did not regularly inhabit swimming pools. He knew that it would be difficult to smuggle a live shark into such a pool, that if there were a shark there, he ought to be able to see it, and that any self-respecting shark would no doubt be so bothered by the chlorine it would not lie quietly and wait at the bottom of the pool. Nonetheless, he described himself as petrified by the thought that such a thing might happen, so that he had given up his twice-weekly swim. For my part, I conceded that I could not conclusively prove that he would never meet a shark in a swimming pool. Such absurd fears are more common than many of us realize. There is, for instance, a cult magazine titled Shark Fear. Legends about sharks, piranhas, or alligators in the plumbing are rife from Florida to New York City. And although these fears may sound ridiculous to most people, that is no consolation to the individuals who suffer from them. Here are some other fears which are widely held. I have encountered them all many times, and which cause real pain to millions of people. Consider whether they are any more reasonable than the preposterous fears mentioned above. The fear of being on a high floor of a tall building because one side of the building might abruptly crumble, or you might suddenly feel an irresistible urge to jump through the window. The fear that one will be possessed by an unconquerable urge to do something outrageous and embarrassing in public. For instance, someone sitting in the audience of a theater may suddenly be struck by the thought that he might get up from his seat, rush to the front, and jump on the stage with the actors. He may then sit there in a cold sweat, not enjoying the play, because of this worry that he may at any moment uncontrollably do this outrageous thing that he does not in the least want to do. This is fascinating. The fear that one will die while asleep. Someone may notice that his heartbeat slows down as he becomes drowsy, and he may then start worrying that it will stop altogether if he falls asleep. The fear of killing or mutilating someone close to you. Mothers sometimes experience a panicky fear that they will plunge a knife into their child, and husbands sometimes torment themselves with the fear that they will strangle their wives. Well, what is happening? These commonplace anxieties are just as unreasonable as the more unusual ones mentioned earlier. We can easily see that they are all fears of something extremely unlikely. This gives a clue to the root of much unnecessary anxiety. A demand that one gets an ironclad, surefire, 100% guarantee that something unpleasant absolutely will not occur. With unlikely events, people are more influenced by a possibility that catches their imagination in some dramatic, spectacular way, rather than by the objective likelihood that it will occur. For instance, you often hear people argue against moving to California because they might die in an earthquake, whereas the death toll from cold weather, not to mention tornadoes and thunderstorms, east of the Rockies hugely exceeds fatalities from earthquakes in the west. Or, some people will be nervous about flying because of the possibility of a fatal plane crash, but driving to the airport is objectively more dangerous. Is this blood that I see before me? It was a blustery, overcast autumn day. At 11:55 a.m., Jersey rushed out of his office and dashed to his regular restaurant. When he arrived, he was relieved to see that he had indeed got there ahead of the long line that formed every day around noon. He settled into his usual seat at a corner table, began to read his newspaper, and absent-mindedly ordered his lunch. When the meal arrived, he picked up his fork and froze. Jersey had spotted something amid the green of the broccoli and the orange of the yams, a tiny spot of crimson. What if it's blood, he thought, and what if it's HIV positive? Jersey was seized by the thought that he might get AIDS. He fled the restaurant, leaving his plate untouched, and wouldn't go back. In the weeks that followed, Jersey spent much time worrying about the possibility that he might catch AIDS, and began to lose sleep. He stopped eating out alone, and when eating out with close friends, he would ask them to inspect his food and reassure him that there was not blood on it. It is, of course, millions of times more likely that you will die from food poisoning following a restaurant meal than that you will pick up AIDS that way. But Jersey never gave a thought to that less sensational, more prosaic possibility. A dread of uncertainty. To some extent, Jersey's anxiety resulted from his telling himself, "I must not get AIDS." However, the main anxiety trigger consisted of his demand for certainty. Since there is a 1 in a billion chance I could contract AIDS when dining out, the fates must guarantee me a 0 in a billion chance. Demanding certainty in an uncertain universe leads paradoxically to concluding that unlikely dangers are virtually guaranteed to happen. And if you insist on absolute 100% security, you create emotional insecurity for yourself. For example, the fear of flying often stems from the idea, I must have a guarantee, signed and sealed by the fates, that the plane won't crash. Consequently, once someone who fears flying agonizingly drags himself aboard the plane, whenever there's the slightest turbulence or the flight attendant frowns, the individual is convinced, this is it, the plane is going down. Quote, cowards die many times before their deaths, says Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. More generally, it's true that habitual worriers suffer 1,000 times more agonies than they would if they stopped worrying about remote possibilities. Jersey's 3-minute exercise. So, it was with Jersey and his worry about AIDS. He demanded guaranteed immunity and thus saw AIDS everywhere. We targeted his, quote, need for certainty in 3-minute exercises such as this one. A. Activating event. I'm dining out and I see something red in my food. What if it's AIDS infected? B. Irrational belief. Life must give me an ironclad guarantee that I will not get AIDS by eating this food. C. Emotional consequences. Anxiety. D. Disputing. What is the evidence that life must give me an ironclad guarantee that I will not contract AIDS while eating out? E. Effective new thinking. It would be lovely if I could get guarantees in life, but none exist. Certainty is a figment of my imagination. And besides, I don't have to be absolutely certain of anything. The probability is high that I will never contract AIDS. There are probably only probabilities. And I can live happily with them as long as I refuse to demand more. Oh yes, if there were any certainty, which there isn't, it would be the certainty that as long as I insist on guarantees, I'm doomed to keep making myself anxious. It's a nuisance not knowing for sure that I won't contract AIDS, but no evidence demonstrates that life must not give me such inconvenience. Life has much uncertainty. Too bad. It's never the doubt itself, but rather my awfulizing about it that worries me. F. New feeling. Concern rather than anxiety about eating out. This is fascinating. Tony's worries. Tony, 25, was tall and thin with curly dark hair and an olive complexion. His problem was escalating, yet he joked wryly about it. Giving me a variant of a standard witticism I've heard from dozens of clients, quote, "After years of false starts and immature attempts," he announced with mock seriousness, I've now completely mastered the art of worrying. Tony had spent 6 months in traditional therapy. Quote, "It helped me understand myself better, or so I naively supposed at the time. I tried to ignore the fact that the whole time I was getting worse." End quote. He terminated therapy when it came to him one day that he could end up single-handedly putting his psychoanalyst's kid through college. When Tony's girlfriend landed a job with a prestigious law firm in San Francisco, they left to New York. Now Tony felt it was again time to face his problem, and so he returned to therapy. Tony gave me a brief history of his worries. Quote, "I can remember worrying about making errors when I was on the Little League baseball team, and then worrying when I was in high school, before a test and during a test, and come to think of it, until I got my grade. I always thought that I worried more than almost everyone, worried about sillier things and dealt with worrying worse than most people. I even worried about the fact that I was such a worrier." End quote. Tony was employed as a bank loan officer, a job he considered stressful. Every morning, the day ahead loomed like an ordeal about to unfold. Quote, "When I start a new project at work, tackle a difficult problem, or when I have a ton of work to do, I worry. And I worry about learning new skills and about doing so poorly that I would lose my job. Overall, it gets more stressful as I move up the corporate ladder. There are times work isn't so bad, like when I have something that's not too challenging or don't have time pressure. But generally, my worrying leads me to dislike my job. Sometimes I'm up all night worrying. And then I'm tired the next day and waste time daydreaming at work. I have concentration difficulties. When I do sleep, I sleep poorly. I do badly at work because of my worrying." End quote. Job security worries. "The root of your problem, Tony," I suggested, "doesn't lie in your Little League experiences, nor in your promotions at work, nor in your shaky financial situation should you lose your job. Rather, it lies in your demandingness, your musts, your have-tos, your got-tos about your goals." I explained to Tony how musty thinking generates anxiety. I described the 3 types of demands: demands on oneself, demands on others, and demands on the universe. "It's clear to me what your major musts are. Would you care to hazard a guess?" I said. Quote, "Let's see, probably must number 3, a demand on my situation, a demand on the universe. Concentrating must not be so difficult. Sleep should come easily. My job must last forever." "Exactly. And why must your job last forever?" "Because if I lose my job, I'm royally screwed. I'll never get such a good job. I've worked my way up. I'll have to start all over again at square one." Notice that Tony's fear that he would lose his job was not a silly fear. like the ones that started this chapter. Employees at all levels, even dependable, hardworking employees, do sometimes lose their jobs. But when asked why this was terrible, Tony responded in exaggerated, melodramatic terms about the consequences of losing his job. Let's suppose that this is the case, although it's unlikely that you'd be starting at square one, even with your experience. We could certainly list 15 or 20 disadvantages of your getting fired, but since everyone faces setbacks in life, why must you not? When you put it that way, I admit that it wouldn't be the end of the world if I lost my job. It would be unwelcome, but not a calamity. I suppose I'd better join the human race and face the sad fact that I could experience setbacks in my life, just like everyone else. To reinforce this, Tony and I made a list of the reasons why his belief that his job must last forever is false. Here's what he wrote. Let's see, how much more do we have on Tony's story? Oh, we got a couple pages, so we're going to stop there for today. We'll read Tony's list tomorrow. My thought for today is based on something that I've been working on doing. End of December, I changed a lot of my habits and diet sort of all at once. And my life, well-being, health, attitude, mental state, productivity, everything improved. And because I changed so much at once, I didn't know which thing was the primary cause. And so I've started changing one thing at a time to see what it was, sort of changing one thing at a time back to how it used to be, just to see if I can figure out if I can dial in more of what's doing a lot of the good for me each day. And so this month, starting the beginning of this month, the only thing I changed was my diet. I went off the keto diet or whatever, and I'm still eating once a day, so still doing like the day fasting, still doing all of my other habits. Everything else is normal. The only thing I've changed is switching off keto diet and going back to like a more normal diet. And normal American diet or whatever. And I have noticed in the past several days, I mean, we're a couple weeks into the month now, but just in the past several days, my attitude, general life, outlook on life has declined. So I'm actually a little shocked that my diet is having this type of effect on me. I assumed it would be like a general sort of energy, like if you change your diet, maybe your energy level changes, or your overall health, your body's health might change. I never thought that it could have an impact on just like your general outlook, how happy you are at any one moment. Yet it seems to be, it's the only thing I've changed. It seems to be clear. I'm definitely struggling more in those areas. Concentration, just sort of general happiness, which affects my motivation, which affects my productivity, which affects my happiness, and it's kind of a vicious loop, right? So I just wanted to communicate mainly that what I'm thinking about today and discovering today is that it's good to sort of test out life changes on yourself so that you figure things out better. Because doing this test has taught me something very important. I think I'll be going back on a primarily keto diet soon, just to see if, and look, that'll give me the other side of the evidence, right? So if I change the diet back and things, start popping again, then that's the evidence both ways that I would be looking for. But I wouldn't have known that had I not thought about my normal everyday routines that I've been doing forever and picked one of them that I thought was normal or whatever and changed it completely just to see what effect it had. Like, there's good wisdom, there's good knowledge to be learned there. That's what I'm thinking about today. All right, guys, have a great day.